and I am doing an interview with a Mrs. Julia Kapraun of 620 Northwest 42nd in Oklahoma City. The date is April 30th, 1974. The time is approximately 9:30 p.m. And ma'am, could you tell us where you were born and the date, and tell of some of your background?
I was born in Gunther, Texas, in October 1904, and I came with my parents to Oklahoma City. To Prague, Oklahoma, where they settled. They were farmers, and then they moved to Wellston when I was about 6 years old, and I lived there until I was graduated from high school. Then I moved to Oklahoma City and worked for 10 years in the Federal Reserve Bank. And then I married, and my husband was Edward William Kapraun, and he passed away in 1963. We had 7 grandchildren, and I take great pride in my yard and garden. I play bridge, I like to bowl. I was married June the 9th, 1930, in Oklahoma City.
All right, now could you tell us how your travel was back when you were a child? And if you do remember the cars or any other means of travel, would you tell us a little bit about them?
When I was a child, the transportation was by buggy or horse and buggy or wagon, and I can remember how excited we got when we saw the first Model T or whatever the Ford was that came down the street. And the airplanes were few and far between in the early days. And of course we had to crank the old Model Ts up to get them to go, and hopefully that they would go.
All right, now, where did you go to school, and what type of subjects were taught? And about what year did you start school?
I went to school in Wellston, Oklahoma, and they didn't have kindergarten in those days. I was the first grade. I think it was around about 1910. I completed all my high school education in Wellston. The schools were supported by the taxes, of course, and everybody was poor, and I was just like, I guess, any kindergarten child starting, was scared to death, and but had many happy memories from our school life in a small school.
I'd like to ask you, if you lived on a farm, approximately how many acres did you have, and how hard was the work on the farm?
We lived on a farm at Wellston, Oklahoma, and we farmed about 80 acres. We had to walk about 1.25 miles to school, a little country schoolhouse. And of course we raised all of our own fruit and potatoes, all gardens, because you didn't run to the store for things like you do now. About the only thing that I can remember ordering old crackers and a whole bunch of stuff, I think, from Montgomery Ward. And our principal crops were corn and cotton. And we all had to work, and we worked hard. And when the weather would get bad, before we could get our crops in, we'd have to pull this cotton off in the bowls, and then after we'd get in from school at night, we'd have to pick that out. Of course, we burned the hulls, and then we had a lot of chores to do. We had feeding of the pigs and the milking of the cows and chopping the wood. And we had that to do morning and evening, and of course it took a long time to get to school and back, so we didn't have very much time to play. That's all.
You told us earlier that you worked at the Federal Reserve Bank, and I'd like to know what your work was like then, and tell us some of the, if you had other odd jobs, if you didn't, but I would like to know about your job at the bank.
I worked at the bank for 10 years, and the Federal Reserve Bank is a clearinghouse for all the banks over the state. It isn't open to the public, and of course, anytime you'd write a check, no matter where, it'd always end up in the Federal Reserve Bank, and of course, we had to balance those all out and send them, and that was the department that I was in, where they totaled all these checks and sent them to the banks. And I worked there. I started there in 1926 and worked there till 1936. Then I quit and raised my family, and practically a housewife ever since. Helped my husband some in his business, but principally I was a housewife.
All right, now, I'd like to ask a question. Could you tell us what the boys and the girls did when you were a child in their spare time after they got all their chores done?
We used to take hoops, a barrel stave, and put a stick on it, and take old cultivator wheels and roll them by the hour, and put two wheels together with a axle thing across it and roll them that way. And then, of course, there wasn't mostly just jacks or marbles for the girls and the boys, the little ones, to play with. We couldn't run to the stores like the children have the opportunity to now. We had to make our own fun. And we used to take the leaves and pin them together with sticks and make hats and make in this land of make-believe, like all little girls and boys like to do.
Next question I'd like to ask would be, when you were a child, could you tell us some of the things you might remember, or some of the things you might have done when you were a child?
Oh, for playing, when we were boys and girls, we had to make our own pastime, and of course, we'd like to get together, the girls and the boys, especially at Halloween time, and so there wasn't too much to do, but it sure was a lot of fun to get out and turn over these outhouses. Of course, everybody was doing it, so they couldn't blame it on us. It was always the other fellow who did it. And I remember our cousin had a pony. Our father was always afraid for us to ride, but we'd go over there and ride, and we always found that it made us a lot cooler if we went real fast. But we almost killed the poor pony, so that was the end of that. And then too, a lot of on Halloween, that seemed to be the time for everybody to get out, and if they could catch some farmer gone, they'd go out and get his cultivator, put it up over the roof of the house up there, nearly killed themselves, working themselves to death to do it. But they got a big kick out of it, and of course, nobody could ever find out who did it. And there's just you had to make your own form of entertainment because it was hard times. And
my next question is, could you tell us a little bit about World War I, and if you want to, could you tell us about World War II?
Well, I remember World War I. We were in grade school at Wellston, and we all the girls knitted a little square, and of course all the women were working and tearing sheets, and they would sew all of these squares together, and we'd send them to the boys or the Red Cross for overseas. And I had two sisters that married two soldier boys, and they went off to war, but they both came home safely. And then during the Second World War, we had shortages and we had rationing and all of that. I still have my old ration books I want to keep. I'll hand those down to my grandchildren, I guess. And we were short of an awful lot of things in there, but I remember we tried to buy a refrigerator and we had to go on a list for about 6 months before we finally got it, and we thought it was terrible when we had to put ice in the bottom of that old box until our name came up on the list, but we made it. And of course everybody put out gardens and tried to can, just kind of like they're doing right now. Whenever we have shortages, why, everybody comes and rallies to the cause, and it makes us better people for it, I think.
All right, the next question is, how did you feel when the first radio come out? And if you can think how you felt, would you please tell us?
I can remember the first radio. It was small set, and all of them you had to listen by the earphone. And how we'd gather anybody that was fortunate and had enough money to buy it at that time. I believe it's about 1926 was the first time that I heard it. 24, 5 or 6 long in there, and we'd gather into their living room, and we'd take turns listening on that earphone, and of course come a long way from that. And the television was about the same way. When anybody in the neighborhood was fortunate enough to get a television, why, everybody they were very popular for quite a while.
Next question is, would you tell us the name of your husband, and could you tell us the name of his occupation and what he did for a living?
My husband was Edward William Kapraun, and he run a Buick Cadillac garage in Oklahoma City. He followed the mechanical work that was his livelihood all of his life, and he had worked most of his life in Oklahoma City until he retired in 1962.
My next question is, when you was a child, how did you keep foods like milk that would spoil? How did you keep these things cold?
When we were children, we would take buckets of milk and put the lid over them and hang them down into the water to keep them cold. And of course we always had the smokehouse, and when my father would kill the hogs in the fall and build his fire in there and just smoke, and it was delicious. And of course we'd pick our apples and wrap them in paper, and oh boy, these Montgomery Ward catalogs came in handy for more things than one. And then about the only time we ever had ice I can remember was when the whole community on 4th of July would get together for a picnic, and then there was a little ice house in Wellston, and they'd go in there, and of course we made all of our own homemade ice cream. And there was through the winter when it was cold, why, Dad would always go out hunting and kill rabbits and squirrels, and they were hung up and froze, and they'd just leave them hung all winter as we needed to eat them.
How could you tell of some of your pastimes that you do now in this? Well, just tell us some of the things you do now for your pastimes.
Well, my main pastime right now is traveling some, and I love to play bridge. I like to bowl, and I had always dreamed of going to Hawaii and finally made it. And then each year I joined a travel club. I love to go. We go on planned trips each year, and I have had 5 or 6 real nice trips, and my husband wasn't ever any hand to go any place. He was a homebody, and since he's been gone, I have been fortunate enough to go and take some of it and see the country. I've never had any desire to go to Europe unless I could go to the Holy Land, but after being able to go across the country, the United States, and seeing the gorgeous mountains, and I just think that we can spend a lot of our money at home with seeing the beautiful country here. There's people say when they retire, some of them are bored to death, but it's not so with me. I left my work in my yard and all these other activities, and I think if people would get out and get a little bit more involved, then they wouldn't have so much free time.
This has been my interview with Mrs. Julia Kapraun of 620 Northwest 42nd, Oklahoma City. And her occupation now is a housewife. The date is April 30th, 1974, and I guess I'll end it there.